The gunshot wound in his shoulder had festered for 3 days before James Xander finally admitted he needed help beyond whiskey and prayer. And the men at the saloon in Red Bluff, California, told him about the woman in the hills who could cure anything short of death itself. The year was 1876, and the summer heat bore down on the Sierra Nevada foothills with relentless intensity. James had been working as a ranch hand at the Double R spread just outside town when a dispute over cards had gone wrong. The other man had drawn first, but James had been faster. Unfortunately, not fast enough to avoid catching lead in his left shoulder. The sheriff had ruled it self-defense, but that did not make the wound hurt any less or heal any faster. Now, 3 days later, James found himself climbing a narrow trail that wound through pine and oak, his shirt stuck to his back with sweat, his shoulder throbbing with each step. The men had given him directions, though they had been vague. "Just keep climbing until you see the smoke from her chimney," old Pete had said. "She does not come down to town, but she will help you if you make it up there." James had asked why she lived alone up in the hills, and the men had exchanged glances. "Some say she had troubles down here," Pete had continued. "Others say she just prefers the company of plants to people. Either way, she knows her business when it comes to healing." The trail grew steeper, and James had to pause several times to catch his breath. His vision swam occasionally, and he knew the fever was getting worse. He had wrapped the wound as best he could, but he could smell the sickly sweet odor of infection even through the bandages. If this woman could not help him, he would likely lose the arm, if not his life. After what felt like hours of climbing, James finally spotted a thin column of smoke rising above the trees. He pushed forward with renewed determination, following the trail around a rocky outcrop. The cabin came into view suddenly, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by what looked like carefully tended gardens. The structure was modest but well maintained, with a covered porch and shuttered windows. Drying herbs hung from the porch rafters, and he could see neat rows of plants growing in raised beds around the property. James stumbled into the clearing, his legs finally giving out. He fell to his knees, supporting himself with his good arm. The world tilted dangerously, and he heard the cabin door open. "Help," he managed to say, though it came out as barely a whisper. Footsteps approached, quick and light. A woman's voice, clear and commanding, cut through the fog in his head. "Can you stand? I need to get you inside." James tried to focus on her face, but his vision was too blurred. He felt her hands, surprisingly strong, gripping his good arm and helping him to his feet. Together, they made it up the porch steps and through the door. The interior of the cabin was dim and cool, a blessed relief from the harsh sunlight. She guided him to a bed in the corner, and he collapsed onto it gratefully. "Let me see the wound," she said, already working at the buttons of his shirt. Her hands were quick and efficient, no hesitation or squeamishness as she peeled away the soiled bandages. He heard her sharp intake of breath. "This is infected badly." "When did this happen?" "3 days ago," James managed to say through gritted teeth. "Got shot in a card game." "And you waited 3 days to seek help?" Her voice held disapproval but not judgment. "Men and their stubborn pride. This could cost you your arm if we are not careful." She moved away, and James heard her working at something, the clink of bottles and jars. The cabin smelled of dried herbs and something else, something green and growing. Despite his pain, he found the scent oddly comforting. She returned with a basin of water and clean cloths. "This will hurt," she warned, and then she began cleaning the wound. James bit down on his lip hard enough to taste blood, but he refused to cry out. Through his pain-hazed vision, he finally got a clear look at her. She was younger than he expected, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark chestnut hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her face was sun-kissed, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw. Her eyes, he noticed, were a striking shade of green focused intently on her work. She wore a simple dress of faded blue calico, with an apron tied over it, both stained with what looked like plant matter and soil. "My name is Lydia," she said as she worked, perhaps trying to distract him from the pain. "Lydia Morgan. What is yours, James Xander?" he gasped out. "People call me James." "Well, James, you are fortunate you came when you did. Another day or two, and I would have been digging lead out of a corpse." She finished cleaning the wound and reached for a clay pot filled with a dark green paste. "This is yarrow and comfrey, among other things. It will draw out the infection and help the flesh knit together. But I will not lie to you, the next few days will not be pleasant." She applied the paste with careful fingers, and James felt a strange sensation, both cooling and burning at once. She wrapped the shoulder with clean bandages, then sat back, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You will stay here until the fever breaks," she said, in a tone that brooked no argument. "I have a guest room of sorts. You are in it. I will bring you water and broth, and you will drink every drop." "Understood," James nodded weakly. "Thank you," he whispered. "Save your thanks until you are healed," she replied, but her voice had softened slightly. "Rest now. The yarrow paste will help with the pain." James closed his eyes, exhaustion overwhelming him. The last thing he remembered before sleep claimed him was the sound of Lydia moving about the cabin, her footsteps quiet and sure. When James woke, it was dark outside. A single lamp burned on a table near the bed, casting soft shadows on the cabin walls. His shoulder still hurt, but the sharp, burning pain had dulled to a deep ache. He turned his head and saw Lydia sitting in a rocking chair near the fireplace, a book open in her lap. She was reading by the light of the fire, her profile illuminated by the dancing flames. "You are awake," she said without looking up from her book. "How do you feel?" "Like I have been kicked by a horse," James admitted, his voice hoarse, "but better than before." She closed the book and came over to the bed, placing a hand on his forehead. Her touch was cool and gentle. "The fever is down, which is a good sign. Are you thirsty? Parched?" She poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and helped him sit up enough to drink. The water was cold and sweet, possibly from a spring. James drank greedily, and she refilled the cup twice more before he was satisfied. "What time is it?" he asked. "Past midnight. You slept for nearly 6 hours." She set the cup aside and checked his bandages, her fingers probing gently at the edges of the wound. "The swelling is already going down. That is good. You will need to stay off your feet for at least a week, possibly 2. "A week," James protested. "I have work. The foreman will not hold my position that long." "Then you will find new work when you are healed," Lydia said firmly. "If you try to leave before you are ready, the infection will come back, and next time it might kill you." "Is your job worth your life?" James wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. The ranch would find someone else to mend fences and break horses. He had a little money saved, enough to tide him over for a few weeks if he was careful. "I suppose not," he admitted. "Good. Now I have broth warming on the fire. You need to eat something to keep your strength up." She brought him a bowl of chicken broth, rich with vegetables and herbs. James ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. He had not realized how hungry he was until he started eating. When he finished, Lydia took the bowl and helped him lie back down. "Thank you," he said again. "I do not know how to repay you for this." "We will worry about payment when you are well," she replied. "For now, just focus on healing. I am going to change the poultice before you sleep again. The first few changes are the most important." She worked quickly, removing the old bandages and cleaning the wound before applying fresh paste and new wrappings. James watched her work, impressed by her skill and confidence. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked. "My grandmother," Lydia said, not pausing in her work. She was a midwife and healer back in Missouri. I spent my childhood at her side, learning about plants and their properties. When she died, I continued studying on my own. I have been practicing for nearly 10 years now. And you came all the way to California. I did. Her tone suggested that this line of questioning was closed. James took the hint and did not press further. When she finished with the bandages, she stood and moved toward the rocking chair. "Sleep now. I will wake you in a few hours to drink more water and check the wound again." "Are you not going to sleep?" James asked, concerned. "I will doze here in the chair. I need to monitor you through the night to make sure the fever does not return." Before he could protest, she held up a hand. "I have done this many times before, James. I know my limits. Now sleep." James closed his eyes, though he felt guilty about keeping her from her own bed. But exhaustion pulled him under quickly, and he drifted off to the sound of the fire crackling in the hearth. The next 3 days passed in a haze of sleeping, drinking broth and water, and having his wound cleaned and dressed. Lydia was a constant presence, always seeming to know when he needed something before he even asked. Despite his weakened state, James found himself observing her closely. She kept a tidy cabin, everything in its place. The main room served as both living area and workshop, with shelves lining the walls, filled with jars and bottles of various sizes. Each was carefully labeled in neat handwriting. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with their mingled scents. A large table dominated one corner, its surface scarred from years of use, covered with mortars and pestles, cutting boards and various tools for preparing medicines. Through the window beside his bed, James could see her gardens. She spent hours each day tending them, weeding, watering, harvesting. He watched her move among the plants with the ease of long practice, her hands gentle as she examined leaves and stems. Sometimes she would talk to the plants, though he was too far away to hear what she said. On the 4th morning, James woke feeling significantly better. The deep ache in his shoulder had eased, and when he tentatively moved his arm, the pain was bearable. He sat up carefully, pleased to find that the room did not spin. Lydia looked up from the pot she was stirring at the fireplace. "You look better," she observed, coming over to check his forehead again. "The fever is completely gone. Let me see the wound." She unwrapped the bandages, and James craned his neck to look at his shoulder. The angry red inflammation had subsided, leaving only slightly pink skin around the entry wound. The flesh was knitting together cleanly, with no sign of infection. "This is healing remarkably well," Lydia said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Another few days and you can start moving around more. But carefully," she added, giving him a stern look. "No sudden movements, no lifting anything heavy with that arm." "Yes, madam," James said, unable to suppress a slight smile. Lydia had a way of speaking that reminded him of a schoolteacher, brooking no nonsense. She caught the smile and raised an eyebrow. "You find something amusing?" "No, madam, just grateful to be on the mend." He paused, then asked, "Would it be all right if I sat at the table today instead of staying in bed? I feel like my muscles are forgetting how to work." Lydia considered this, then nodded. "For short periods, yes, but if you start feeling dizzy or weak, you return to bed immediately." "Understood." "Understood." After changing his dressing, she helped him to the table. His legs were shakier than he expected, and he was grateful for her steadying hand. She brought him a more substantial breakfast than the broths he had been subsisting on: cornbread with honey, scrambled eggs, and coffee. James ate slowly, savoring the solid food. As he ate, he watched Lydia work at preparing her medicines. She moved with practiced efficiency, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, measuring out ingredients with careful precision, mixing and stirring various concoctions. "Do you get many visitors up here?" James asked, curious about how she made her living in such isolation. "A few," Lydia replied, not looking up from her work. "People from town come when they or their loved ones are sick, sometimes miners from the camps further up in the hills. I treat what I can here, and I prepare medicines for them to take with them. Word has spread over the years. People know where to find me when they need help. It must be lonely, though, living up here by yourself." Lydia's hands paused for just a moment before resuming their work. "I prefer solitude to certain kinds of company," she said carefully. "And I am not entirely alone. I have my gardens, my work. That is enough for me." James sensed he had touched on something painful and changed the subject. "Would you teach me about some of the plants you use? I have time on my hands, and I would like to understand what is healing me." For the first time since he had arrived, Lydia smiled, a real smile that lit up her face. "Most people have no interest in learning," she said. "They just want the cure without understanding the how or why. I would be happy to teach you." She brought over several jars and began explaining their contents. "This is yarrow, what I have been using on your wound. It stops bleeding and fights infection. The native peoples have used it for generations, and they taught the first settlers about its properties. This," she held up another jar, "is comfrey. Some call it knit bone because it helps fractures and wounds heal faster. Together, they make a powerful remedy for injuries like yours." James listened intently as she described plant after plant, their uses and preparations. She spoke with passion and knowledge, her voice animated in a way it had not been during their previous conversations. He found himself drawn not just to the information but to the way she shared it, the love for her work evident in every word. "You have a gift for teaching," James observed when she paused to mix a new batch of poultice for his shoulder. Lydia looked surprised by the compliment. "Thank you. My grandmother always said that knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted. Healing should be shared, not kept secret." "She sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Lydia said softly, a note of sadness in her voice. "She raised me after my mother died, taught me everything she knew. When she passed, I felt lost for a long time." "Is that when you came to California?" Lydia was quiet for a moment, her hands still on the mortar and pestle. "In a way," she said finally. "I had reasons to leave Missouri. Starting fresh out here seemed like the best choice. I had heard about the mining camps, knew there would be people in need of medical care. So I came west and eventually found my way to these hills. That was 5 years ago." James wanted to ask more, to understand what had driven her to this isolated life, but he respected her privacy. Everyone had their reasons for coming west, and not all of them were stories they wanted to share. Over the next few days, a routine developed between them. James would wake to find Lydia already up, tending her gardens or preparing the day's medicines. She would change his dressing, bring him breakfast, and then return to her work. He spent his time watching her, asking questions, learning. In the afternoons, she would often sit and read, and sometimes she would read aloud to him, books on botany and medicine that she had collected over the years. James found himself looking forward to these times together. Lydia had a melodious voice, and she read with expression, making even dry medical texts interesting. But more than that, he enjoyed her company. She was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught him by surprise. When he made her laugh, which happened more frequently as he regained his strength, it felt like a genuine accomplishment. On the 8th day after his arrival, Lydia declared him well enough to walk outside. "Short walks only," she cautioned as she helped him out onto the porch. Stay in the clearing and come back inside if you feel tired. The fresh air and sunshine felt wonderful after being confined to the cabin. James walked slowly around the clearing, examining Lydia's gardens more closely. They were meticulously organized with small wooden markers identifying each plant. He recognized some of them from her lessons: chamomile, lavender, sage, mint. Others were unfamiliar, their names written in Latin on the markers. Lydia was kneeling in one of the beds, carefully harvesting what looked like roots. She glanced up as he approached. "How do you feel?" "Good. Stronger." James gestured to the gardens. "This is impressive. You have done all this yourself over the past 5 years, yes?" "Each year I expand a little more, add new plants. Some I brought as seeds from Missouri. Others I have found growing wild and transplanted here. The native peoples in these hills have been helpful too, teaching me about plants I was unfamiliar with." "Do they come to you for treatment?" "Sometimes. Mostly I trade knowledge with their healers. They know things about the plants here that I am still learning." She sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her hands. "There is always more to learn. That is what I love about this work. I will never know everything, but I can always keep trying." James found himself admiring her passion, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her work. He realized with a start that he was growing fond of her, perhaps more than was wise for a temporary patient, but he could not help it. Lydia was unlike any woman he had ever met. Independent, skilled, unafraid of solitude. She did not need anyone, which somehow made him want to be around her even more. That night, as they sat together after supper, James found himself talking about his own life. He told her about growing up on a farm in Texas, losing both parents to fever when he was 16, drifting west doing odd jobs until he landed in California. "I have been working ranches mostly," he said. "I am good with horses, can mend fences, do whatever needs doing. But it is not what I want to do forever." "What do you want to do?" Lydia asked, genuinely interested. James hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I have been saving money to buy a piece of land of my own. Nothing big, just enough for a small spread. Maybe raise some horses, grow some crops. Build a real home instead of just drifting from bunkhouse to bunkhouse." "That sounds like a good dream," Lydia said. "Land of your own, roots. I can understand the appeal." "You have that here," James pointed out. "This is yours, is it not?" "It is. I filed a claim when I arrived, built the cabin myself with help from some men in town. It is not much, but it is mine." She looked around the cabin with obvious affection. "I have never had anything that was truly mine before, not like this." They fell into comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. James found himself reluctant for the evening to end, to return to the guest bed and spend another night apart from her company. But eventually, Lydia stood and banked the fire. "You should rest," she said. "Tomorrow, if you feel up to it, we can walk a bit further. There is a creek not far from here. The exercise will do you good." James agreed and retired to bed. But he lay awake for a long time, thinking about Lydia, about the unexpected peace he had found in her cabin, about how much he was going to miss this place when he was healed enough to leave. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for walking. After breakfast and a dressing change, Lydia led James on a narrow path through the trees. True to her word, it was not far to the creek, perhaps a quarter-mile from the cabin. The water ran clear over smooth stones, creating a pleasant babbling sound. "This is where I get my water," Lydia explained, showing him a large clay jug hidden among the rocks. "I carry it back each day. It is pure and cold, even in summer." They sat on a large flat rock beside the creek, watching the water flow past. Birds sang in the trees and a squirrel chattered at them from a nearby pine. James felt more at peace than he had in years. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Lydia looked at him questioningly. For what? For all of this? For saving my life, yes, but also for letting me stay here, for teaching me, for your company. These past days have been difficult, but also some of the best I can remember. Lydia's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked away. You are welcome, she said quietly. I have enjoyed having you here, to be honest. It is nice to have someone to talk to, someone interested in learning. I forget sometimes how quiet it gets. You could have that all the time, you know, James said carefully. Company, I mean. You could come down to town more often, socialize. Lydia shook her head. Town is not for me. I learned that early on. People there, they talk, they judge. They have ideas about how a woman should behave, who she should be. Up here, I can be myself without worrying about meeting anyone's expectations. What happened? James asked gently. In town, I mean. You do not have to tell me if you do not want to, but I sense something drove you up here beyond just wanting solitude. Lydia was quiet for so long that James thought she was not going to answer. Then she began to speak, her voice low. When I first came to Red Bluff, I tried to set up a practice in town. I rented a small room, hung a sign advertising my services as a healer. At first, some people came. But then the town's doctor, a man named Harrison, decided I was competition. He spread rumors about me, said I was a fraud, that I was practicing medicine without proper training. He convinced most of the town that I was dangerous. But you saved lives, James protested. Surely people could see that, some did. But Dr. Harrison had influence, had been in Red Bluff for years. And I was a young woman alone, no husband, no family. That made me suspect in people's eyes. There were whispers about me, ugly ones. Eventually, I realized I could not win against the prejudice, so I moved up here. The people who really needed help, they found me, and I did not have to deal with the judgment and gossip anymore. James felt anger rise in him at the injustice of it. That doctor should be ashamed of himself. He probably sleeps well at night, Lydia said with a bitter smile. Men like that usually do, but I made my peace with it. I have a good life here, better than I might have had in town. I answer to no one but myself. Still, it is not right that you were driven away. Lydia turned to look at him, her green eyes intense. No, it is not right. But that is the world we live in, James. Women who do not fit into neat boxes, who have skills and knowledge, who dare to be independent, we make people uncomfortable. They feel the need to put us back in our place. I decided my place was here on my own terms. James understood then the steel in her, the determination that had allowed her to build a life alone in these hills. She was not here just because she preferred solitude. She was here because she refused to be diminished by small minds and smaller men. For what it is worth, he said, I think you are remarkable. What you have built here, what you know, the lives you have saved, that takes real courage. Lydia's expression softened. Thank you, she said simply. That means more than you know. They walked back to the cabin slowly, and James found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. The way her shoulder occasionally brushed his good arm, the way she pointed out various plants along the path and shared facts about them. He was falling for her, he realized. Perhaps had been since that first moment when she had helped him into her cabin, her voice cutting through his pain with such assurance. But what could he offer her? He was a ranch hand with a few dollars saved, no land, no prospects beyond the next job. She had a home, a profession, a life she had fought for. Why would she want to give that up for him? That evening, as they sat together after supper, Lydia asked him about his plans. Your shoulder is healing well, she said. Another week or two and you should be fit for work again. Will you return to the Double R? James shook his head. I do not think so. I wrote them a letter, had it sent down with one of your patients last week. Told them I would not be returning. It is time I moved on, found something better. What will you do? I am not sure yet. Maybe try to find work that pays better, save faster for that land I want. He hesitated, then decided to take a risk. Or maybe I could find work closer to here. Red Bluff seems like a decent town, despite having a fool for a doctor. Lydia smiled at that. It has its good points. There are ranches in the area always looking for hands, and the pay is fair, from what I understand. Would you mind if I stayed around? James asked, his heart pounding. I do not mean here in your cabin. I know I have imposed on your hospitality long enough, but in the area. I could visit, maybe help you with things around here when I have days off. Lydia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, I would not mind that. In fact, I think I would like it very much. The relief James felt was almost overwhelming. Good, he said, smiling. Then that is what I will do. They talked late into the night, making plans. James would spend another week recuperating, then he would head down to town and look for work. Lydia gave him the names of a few ranches that might be hiring, and they agreed he would come back to visit on his days off. I could help you expand your gardens, James suggested. I may not know plants like you do, but I can dig and build. We could put in more beds, maybe build a proper greenhouse for the plants that need protection in winter. Lydia's eyes lit up at the suggestion. A greenhouse would be wonderful. I lose plants every winter to frost, but the materials would be expensive. I will save for them, James promised. It will give me something to work toward, beyond just land of my own. As the fire burned low, James realized he had found something he had not even known he was looking for. Not just healing for his body, but a purpose, a future that felt real and achievable. And at the center of it was Lydia, this remarkable woman who had saved his life and somehow captured his heart in the process. The following week passed too quickly. Each day, James grew stronger, able to do more. He started helping Lydia with chores around the cabin, chopping firewood, hauling water, weeding the gardens. She protested at first, worried about his shoulder, but he insisted. You have taken care of me for 2 weeks, he said. Let me return the favor. Working alongside her, James learned even more about her life and work. She taught him how to identify plants in their natural habitat, how to harvest them without damaging the parent plant, how to prepare and preserve them. He absorbed everything like a sponge, fascinated by the depth of her knowledge. One afternoon, as they worked together harvesting chamomile, Lydia asked him about his family. You said your parents died when you were 16. Do you have siblings? A younger sister, James said. Sarah. She went to live with our aunt in St. Louis after our parents passed. We write occasionally, but we have not seen each other in years. She is married now, has 2 children I have never met. You miss her? I do, James admitted. But we chose different paths. She wanted stability, family. I needed to roam to figure out who I was without my parents. Maybe now, though, I am ready to put down roots like she did. Is that what you see when you think about buying land? A family, James considered this. I suppose I do. I never thought much about it before, but yes. A home is not just a place, is it? It is people too, someone to share it with. He looked at Lydia as he said this, and their eyes met. The air between them seemed to shift, charged with unspoken possibility. Lydia looked away first, focusing intently on the flowers she was harvesting. That sounds like a good dream, she said quietly. That night, as James prepared for bed, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would tell Lydia how he felt. He could not leave without her knowing, without at least giving her the choice. If she rejected him, so be it. But he would not walk away wondering what might have been. But the next morning, before he could speak, a commotion outside interrupted their breakfast. James looked out the window to see a man on horseback riding hard up the trail toward the cabin. Lydia saw him too and immediately rose, concern on her face. "Something is wrong," she said, already moving toward the door. The rider, a young man James recognized from town, nearly fell off his horse in his haste. "Miss Morgan, you have to come. There has been an accident at the mine. Cave in. Multiple men hurt, at least one dead. We need you." Lydia did not hesitate. "James, help me gather supplies." She began pulling jars and bottles from her shelves, wrapping them quickly in cloth. James grabbed her medical bag and held it open while she filled it with bandages, salves, and tinctures. "I am coming with you," James said. "Your shoulder is healed enough. You might need extra hands, and I have learned enough to help." His tone brooked no argument, and after a moment, Lydia nodded. They rode down the mountain on the young man's horse, James behind Lydia, his good arm wrapped around her waist to keep them both steady on the rough trail. Despite the grim errand, he could not help but be aware of her body pressed against his, the way she leaned back into him as they rode. The mine was chaos when they arrived. Men milled about, some injured, others trying to organize a rescue effort for those still trapped. Lydia dismounted and immediately took charge, her voice cutting through the confusion. "Who is hurt worst? Bring them to me first." For the next several hours, James watched Lydia work with awe and admiration. She moved from patient to patient, assessing injuries, giving orders, administering treatment. Her hands were steady, her voice calm even as she dealt with horrific wounds. James assisted as best he could, holding patients still, fetching water, applying bandages under her direction. 3 men had died in the initial collapse, their bodies already laid out and covered with blankets. But Lydia saved at least 5 others who might have died without her intervention. She set broken bones, stitched cuts, treated a man who could not breathe due to dust in his lungs. By the time the sun began to set, all the surviving injured had been stabilized. Lydia had organized some of the less injured men to transport the worst cases to town where they could be monitored. She left detailed instructions for their care, along with medicines and strict orders that they send for her if any of them took a turn for the worse. As they prepared to ride back up the mountain, one of the mine owners approached. He was a heavy-set man in expensive clothes, clearly someone of means. "Miss Morgan," he said, "I cannot thank you enough for what you did here today. You saved lives. Please let me pay you for your services." "I do not take payment for emergency care," Lydia said tiredly. "Just make sure those men have what they need to recover, including time off with pay." The mine owner looked uncomfortable. "Well now, I cannot promise. Then we have nothing more to discuss," Lydia said coldly. She turned to leave, but the man caught her arm. "Now wait just a minute. You cannot come here and start making demands about how I run my business." James stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Take your hand off her, now." The mine owner looked at James, seemed to assess the situation, and released Lydia's arm. "I meant no offense. I will see what I can do for the men." "You do that," Lydia said. She walked away without another word, and James followed, leading the horse. Once they were away from the mine, Lydia stopped and leaned against a tree, her legs suddenly shaky. The adrenaline that had kept her going all day was wearing off, leaving her exhausted. James put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You were amazing today," he said quietly. "I have never seen anything like it. The way you saved those men, the way you stood up to that mine owner." "I was just doing what needed to be done," Lydia said, but her voice shook slightly. "No, you were being brave and skilled, and everything that is good in this world." James turned her gently to face him. "Lydia, I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the right moment, but I am starting to think there is no perfect time for this." Lydia looked up at him, her green eyes wide in the fading light. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," James said simply. "Maybe I already have fallen. I know I have no right, that you have a life here and I am just a ranch hand with nothing to offer. But I could not leave without telling you. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and kindness and passion for your work, I have never felt this way about anyone. And if there is any chance you might feel the same way, I want to stay, not just nearby, but here, with you, if you will have me." Lydia stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "You think you have nothing to offer," she said. "James, you have given me more in these few weeks than anyone has in years. You listened to me, learned from me, treated me as an equal. You see me, not as some strange woman who does not fit society's mold, but as a person. That is everything." "So you feel the same?" James hardly dared to hope. "I feel the same," Lydia confirmed. "I have been fighting it, telling myself it was foolish to get attached to someone who would be leaving. But yes, James, I love you too." James felt joy surge through him. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gently at first, then with more passion as she responded. She tasted of herbs and wood smoke and something uniquely her. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "We should get back to the cabin," Lydia said, her cheeks flushed. "It is getting dark." They rode back up the mountain, James holding Lydia close, both of them giddy with relief and happiness. The future, which had seemed so uncertain just hours ago, now stretched before them full of possibility. Over the next few months, James found work at her ranch just a few miles from Red Bluff. The pay was decent, and the foreman, a fair man named Thomas, agreed to give James Sundays off. James spent every free moment at Lydia's cabin, helping her with her work, learning more about healing, and simply enjoying her company. They fell into an easy partnership. James built new garden beds, repaired the cabin roof, and started gathering materials for the greenhouse he had promised. Lydia taught him more about plants and medicine, and slowly, James became skilled enough to help her with patients. Word spread about the mine incident, and more people began making the climb to Lydia's cabin. She treated them all, from children with fevers to miners with injuries to women with ailments they were too embarrassed to discuss with the male doctor in town. James helped where he could, and patients grew accustomed to seeing him there, assisting Lydia. As autumn turned to winter, James and Lydia talked seriously about their future. "I want to marry you," James said one evening as they sat by the fire. "But I do not want you to give up anything for me. This cabin, your practice, your independence, it is all important. I want to add to your life, not take away from it." "You already do add to it," Lydia said, taking his hand. "Every day. But yes, I want to marry you too. We can build a life here together, both of us. You can keep working at the ranch until we have enough saved for your land. Or maybe we already have what we need right here." "What do you mean?" Lydia gestured around them. "I have 20 acres here, plenty of room to expand. You could build on more to the cabin, create a real house. We could have that greenhouse, maybe even a barn for horses like you wanted. This could be our home together." James felt emotion well up in him. She was offering him not just herself, but a partnership, a true home. "Are you sure? This is your place. I do not want to take over." "You would not be taking over. We would be building something together," she smiled. "Partners in healing and in life. What do you say?" "I say yes. To all of it." They married that winter, a simple ceremony in the cabin with just a circuit preacher and 2 witnesses from town. Lydia wore a dress of deep blue that brought out her eyes, and James wore his best shirt, scrubbed clean and pressed. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and James kissed his bride with joy in his heart. That night, as they lay together for the first time as husband and wife, James marveled at how his life had changed. A gunshot wound that could have killed him had instead led him to love, to purpose, to a home. Lydia curled against him, her head on his chest, and he held her close, grateful for every twist of fate that had brought him to her door. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. James left his job at the ranch and devoted himself full-time to their homestead. He expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom, a larger kitchen, and a dedicated room for Lydia's medicine work. He built the greenhouse, a beautiful structure with glass panes he traded for with a merchant in town. Lydia was overjoyed, immediately filling it with seedlings and plants that needed protection from the elements. Together, they tended the gardens, now expanded to fill nearly half of their 20 acres. James proved to have a natural talent for growing things, his patience and attention to detail serving him well. Under their combined care, the plants thrived. Their reputation grew. People came from further and further away seeking Lydia's healing skills. Some paid with money, others with goods, chickens, goats, lumber, cloth. James and Lydia turned no one away, regardless of their ability to pay. They had enough, and helping people was more important than accumulating wealth. In the summer, a family of settlers arrived, the wife heavy with child and having complications. Lydia worked for 3 days straight, rarely sleeping, fighting to save both mother and baby. When the child finally came, a healthy girl, and the mother survived, the father wept with gratitude. "You are an angel," he told Lydia. "God sent us to you." "I am just a healer," Lydia replied gently, "but I am glad I could help. Make sure your wife rests for at least 2 weeks before traveling further." The family stayed camped near the cabin while the mother recovered, and James found himself enjoying their company. The father, whose name was Robert, helped James with various projects, and the couple's young son loved exploring the gardens with Lydia, asking endless questions about the plants. When they finally left, Robert pressed a small pouch into James's hand. "It is all we can spare, but please take it." Inside was $15, a fortune for settlers. James tried to refuse, but Robert insisted. "Your wife saved my family. This is the least we can do." After they left, James gave the money to Lydia. "For medicine supplies," he said, "or whatever you need." Lydia counted the bills, then looked up at James with an odd expression. "Or we could save it, for the future, for when we have children of our own." James felt his heart skip. "Are you saying, 'Not yet,'" Lydia said quickly, "but I would like to. Have children with you, I mean, if you want that too." "I want that more than anything," James said, pulling her into his arms. "A family with you here in this place we have built together. Yes." That fall, Lydia's suspicions proved correct. She was expecting a child due in the early spring. James was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure. He became almost comically protective, insisting Lydia rest more, trying to take over all the heavy work. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Lydia said with exasperation after James tried to prevent her from lifting a basket of laundry. "I know my own limits, James. Trust me." "I do trust you. I just want to take care of you." "Then take care of me by not treating me like an invalid." "I need to keep moving, keep working. It is good for me and the baby." James reluctantly agreed, though he still hovered. Lydia found it endearing, even when it was annoying. She knew it came from love, from his deep desire to protect what they had built together. Winter came, and their preparations intensified. James made sure they had ample firewood, enough food stored to last through any storm. He built a cradle from oak, sanding it smooth so there were no rough edges. Lydia sewed tiny clothes, hemming each one with care. On a cold March morning, Lydia's labor began. James sent for a midwife from town, a woman named Martha who Lydia trusted. Then he stayed by his wife's side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. The labor was long and difficult. As the hours stretched on, James felt fear creep in. But Lydia remained calm, focused, working with her body's rhythms. Martha praised her, saying she was doing everything right. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry, his tiny fists waving in protest at the cold air. Martha cleaned him quickly and handed him to Lydia, who cradled him against her chest with tears streaming down her face. "A boy," she whispered. "James, we have a son." James looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair, the perfect miniature hands. Love overwhelmed him, so intense it was almost painful. "He is perfect," he managed to say through his own tears. "You are both perfect." They named him Daniel after James's father. The baby was healthy and strong, nursing well and growing quickly. James discovered depths of tenderness in himself he had never known existed. He could spend hours just watching Daniel sleep, marveling at the miracle of him. Lydia recovered quickly from the birth, her extensive knowledge of herbs ensuring she healed well. Within a few weeks, she was back to seeing patients, though she took on fewer and rested more. James took over much of Daniel's care when Lydia was working, learning to change diapers, to soothe a crying baby, to rock him to sleep. "You are a natural father," Lydia observed one evening, watching James walk around the cabin with Daniel against his shoulder, humming softly. "I had a good example," James replied. "My father was patient and kind. I try to be the same." As Daniel grew, he became the center of their world, but they did not let parenthood consume them entirely. They still worked together in the gardens, still treated patients, still made time for each other. Their love had only deepened, strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. One day, when Daniel was about 6 months old, a rider came up to the cabin with a message. James took it, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It was from his sister, Sarah. "She is coming to visit," he told Lydia, reading through the letter quickly. "She and her husband and children. They are traveling west to Oregon and want to stop here for a few weeks." "That is wonderful," Lydia said, genuine pleasure in her voice. "You must be so excited to see her." "I am," James admitted. "I have missed her, and I am eager for her to meet you and Daniel." Sarah's family arrived in late summer, and the reunion was emotional. Sarah, now 27 with 2 children of her own, embraced her brother tightly. "You look so well," she said, tears in her eyes. "Happy, I have been worried about you for years, wondering if you were all right." "I am more than all right," James said. "I am home. Come meet my wife." Sarah and Lydia took to each other immediately. They spent hours talking, sharing stories about James, about their lives, about motherhood. Sarah's children, a boy of 5 and a girl of 3, played with baby Daniel, gentle and curious about the tiny cousin they had never met. Sarah's husband, a quiet man named Peter, helped James with various projects around the homestead. Over dinner one evening, Peter commented on what James and Lydia had built. "This is impressive. You have a real home here, a good life. I can see why you are not eager to go to Oregon." "Oregon has opportunities," James acknowledged, "but I have everything I need right here. Land, a wife I love, my son, work that matters. What more could I ask for?" Sarah smiled at her brother. "I am so happy for you, James. When we were young, after mother and father died, I worried you would never find your place, but you have, and with such an extraordinary woman." "I know how lucky I am," James said, looking at Lydia across the table. She smiled back at him, and the love between them was palpable. When Sarah's family left to continue their journey west, both James and Lydia felt the pang of separation. But they also felt grateful for the visit, for the strengthening of family bonds, for the promise to stay in touch and visit again. Years passed in a rhythm of work and love. Daniel grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved helping his mother in the gardens and riding around the property with his father. When he was 3, Lydia gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Lucy. 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named Samuel. The cabin continued to expand to accommodate their growing family. James proved skilled at carpentry, building on new rooms, always with an eye toward both function and beauty. Their home became a warm, welcoming place, filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the smells of Lydia's cooking and medicines. Daniel showed an early interest in healing, often watching his mother work with patience. By the time he was 10, he could identify most of the plants in their gardens and knew basic first aid. Lydia taught him patiently, pleased to pass on her knowledge to the next generation. Lucy took after her father, more interested in animals and building than in plants. James taught her to ride, and by age 7 she could handle a horse better than most adults. She had her mother's determination, though, and when she set her mind to something, nothing could dissuade her. Samuel, the baby, seemed to have a bit of both parents in him. He was gentle and patient like James, but intellectually curious like Lydia. At 5 years old, he could sit for hours listening to his mother read from her medical books, asking thoughtful questions. Their reputation in the area had solidified over the years. Lydia was known simply as the healer in the hills, and people traveled from as far as Sacramento to seek her help. James had become equally skilled in many areas, able to assist with most treatments and handle simpler cases on his own. The mine owner, who had been so dismissive years ago, eventually came to them himself when his own son fell ill with a fever that the town doctor could not cure. Lydia treated the boy without mentioning their previous encounter, and when the child recovered, the mine owner returned with a substantial payment and a genuine apology. "I was wrong about you," he admitted to Lydia. "I let pride and prejudice cloud my judgment. You are a credit to this community, and I am grateful beyond words for what you did for my son." Lydia accepted the apology with grace, and from that point on, the mine owner became one of their biggest advocates in town. He made sure everyone knew that the healer in the hills was the real deal, that she had saved his son when conventional medicine had failed. This led to increased acceptance in Red Bluff itself. People who had once whispered about Lydia now spoke of her with respect. The town doctor, old Harrison, had retired by this point, replaced by a younger physician who had no ego about consulting with Lydia on difficult cases. One spring day, when James was 42 and Lydia 41, they stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the gardens. Daniel, now 19, was preparing to go to medical school back east. Lucy, 16, was helping her father build a new barn. Samuel, 13, was absorbed in a book as usual. "Did you ever imagine this?" Lydia asked, leaning into James's side. "When I first pulled you into my cabin, half dead from that gunshot," James wrapped his arm around her waist. "Not in my wildest dreams. I thought I was just looking for someone to patch me up so I could get back to work. Instead, I found everything I had been searching for my entire life." "I was so lonely before you came," Lydia admitted. "I told myself I was content with solitude, but I was lying to myself. I needed this. Family, partnership, love. I just did not know it until you showed me." "We saved each other," James said simply. "That is what love does." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, grateful for the life they had built, for the children they had raised, for the 25 years they had spent together. Daniel left for medical school that fall, promising to write often and return for visits. His departure left a hole in the household, but they adjusted. Lydia threw herself into training Lucy in the aspects of healing that did interest her, mainly treating animals. Samuel continued his voracious reading, showing signs that he might follow his brother into medicine. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. James's sister Sarah wrote less frequently, her letters bearing the marks of age and difficulty. When word came that she had passed away peacefully in her sleep in Oregon, James grieved for the little girl he had protected after their parents died, for the woman who had found her own happiness out west. Lydia's own health remained strong, though she gradually took on fewer patients, training others to carry on her work. A young woman from town, a widow named Emma, began apprenticing with her, learning the craft of healing. Emma eventually built her own cabin nearby, creating a satellite practice. Daniel returned from medical school at 25, a trained physician, but with immense respect for his mother's traditional methods. He opened a practice in Red Bluff that combined conventional medicine with the herbal remedies he had grown up with. The combination proved highly effective, and his practice thrived. Lucy married a ranch foreman when she was 22, a kind man who appreciated her independent spirit. They built a home on the far side of Lydia and James's property, raising horses and starting their own family. Samuel followed his brother to medical school, though he specialized in surgery. As grandchildren arrived, the homestead became even livelier. James built a larger dining table to accommodate family dinners, which happened every Sunday. 3 generations gathered to eat, talk, and share their lives. On their 30th wedding anniversary, James surprised Lydia with a gift. He led her out to the greenhouse, which they had expanded several times over the years. Inside, he had built a special section just for her. "For your research," he explained. A space where you can experiment with new plant combinations, develop new medicines. "You have always given so much to everyone else. I wanted you to have something just for you." Lydia was moved to tears. Even after 30 years, James still found ways to show his love to support her work. "Thank you," she whispered, kissing him. "For this, for everything, for seeing me always." "It is easy to see you," James replied. "You are the light of my life, you always have been." They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. James's hair turned silver and Lydia's showed more gray than brown. Lines creased their faces, markers of years spent smiling, worrying, living fully. But their hands still fit together perfectly, and they still found joy in each other's company. When James was 65, he fell ill with pneumonia. Lydia nursed him through it, using every skill she had accumulated over 4 decades of healing. Daniel came to help, combining his medical training with his mother's wisdom. Together, they pulled James through. "You are not allowed to leave me yet," Lydia told him fiercely as he recovered. "We have more years ahead of us, do you hear me?" "Yes, my love," James said weakly, squeezing her hand. "I am not going anywhere. I have too much to stay for." He recovered fully, and they enjoyed several more good years. They spent their days working in the gardens at a slower pace, playing with grandchildren, sitting on the porch watching sunsets. The simple pleasures of a life well lived. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars come out, James said, "Do you have any regrets? Anything you wish you had done differently?" Lydia thought for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "Not a single one. Every choice I made, every hardship I faced led me here. To you, to our family, to this life. How could I regret any of that?" "I feel the same," James said. "Even getting shot was a blessing in disguise. It brought me to you." "Our children are doing well," Lydia continued. "Daniel is an excellent doctor. Lucy is happy with her horses and her family. Samuel is making a real difference with his surgical skills. We built something good, James. Something that will continue long after we are gone. That is the dream, is it not? To leave the world better than we found it. I think we have done that." They sat in peaceful silence, hands clasped, watching the night deepen around them. Two people who had found each other against the odds, who had built a life of purpose and love, who had raised a family and served their community. They had faced hardships and celebrated triumphs. They had grown and changed, but always together. As the years continued to pass, James and Lydia settled into a comfortable rhythm. They were in their 70s now, still active but slowing down. Daniel had taken over most of the more demanding cases, while Lydia consulted and taught. James spent his days maintaining the property with help from his sons-in-law and grandson. Their great-grandchildren began to arrive, tiny faces that reminded them of their own youth. Holding these babies, James and Lydia felt the circle of life complete. They had been young lovers once, then parents, then grandparents, and now this. Each stage had brought its own joys. One spring morning, when James was 78 and Lydia 77, they walked down to the creek together, moving slowly but steadily. It was the same creek where James had confessed his love so many decades ago. They sat on the same flat rock, now worn smooth by time and weather. "Do you remember that day?" James asked. "When I told you I loved you, of course," Lydia said. "I remember everything about it, how terrified you looked, how your voice shook, how my heart soared when I realized you felt the same way I did." "Best day of my life," James said. "Well, one of many best days. Our wedding, the births of our children, all the little moments in between." "We have been blessed," Lydia agreed. "More than I ever thought possible when I was that lonely young woman living alone in these hills." "You were never alone after I arrived," James said. "And you never will be, as long as I draw breath." "I know," Lydia said softly. "That is the greatest gift you have given me, the assurance that I am loved always." They sat together as the water burbled past, the same constant music it had played for decades. Around them, the forest teemed with life. Birds sang, squirrels chattered, insects hummed. The world continued its ancient rhythms, and James and Lydia were part of it, woven into the fabric of this place they had made their own. Years later, when James passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84, Lydia grieved deeply but without despair. They had been married for 56 years, an entire lifetime built together. She had his love letters saved in a wooden box, his favorite tools hanging in the barn, his presence in every corner of their home. Daniel and Lucy and Samuel gathered around their mother, supporting her through the loss. But Lydia surprised them with her strength. "Your father and I had a wonderful life," she told them. "I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will not diminish what we had by falling apart. He would want me to continue, to find joy in our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, to keep teaching and healing as long as I am able. That is how I will honor his memory." And that is what she did. For 3 more years, Lydia continued her work, training new healers, consulting on difficult cases, tending her gardens. She spent time with her family, sharing stories about James, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who barely remembered him. When Lydia finally passed away at 80, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were about James. "Tell him I am coming," she whispered. "Tell him to wait for me." The legacy James and Lydia left behind was substantial. Their 3 children all continued in healing professions, and several grandchildren followed suit. The homestead remained in the family, now run by Lucy's oldest son, who had inherited his grandfather's love of the land and his grandmother's knowledge of plants. The people of Red Bluff and the surrounding areas remembered them for generations. Stories were told about the healer woman who lived alone in the hills, and the cowboy who climbed up daily seeking her remedies and found love instead. About how they had built a life together based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and deep affection. About how they had served their community for decades, turning no one away, helping anyone who needed it. A small plaque was eventually placed at the entrance to the trail leading up to the homestead, in memory of James Xander and Lydia Morgan, who taught us that love and healing are the greatest gifts we can offer each other. Their story became part of the local folklore, told to children as an example of how love can transform lives, how two people who seem unlikely to meet can find each other and build something beautiful together. Young couples would sometimes hike up to the old homestead, now maintained as a historical site by the family, to see where James and Lydia had lived and loved. The cabin still stood, preserved carefully, with its expanded rooms and careful construction showing James's craftsmanship. The gardens, though not as extensive as they had been in Lydia's time, still grew medicinal plants, tended by her descendants. The greenhouse James had built as a gift remained functional, its glass panes replaced over the years but the structure sound. In the years that followed, medical researchers became interested in Lydia's notebooks, which Daniel had carefully preserved. Her observations about plant properties, her careful records of treatments and outcomes, proved valuable to the study of traditional medicine. A small foundation was established in her name, dedicated to researching and preserving traditional healing knowledge. The love story of James and Lydia endured because it spoke to something universal: the human need for connection, for purpose, for belonging. They had found all of that in each other, two wounded souls who had climbed toward healing and discovered love along the way. Their great-great-grandchildren, living in the modern era, still heard stories about their ancestors. About the woman who refused to let society define her, who built a life on her own terms. About the man who saw her value when others did not, who supported her dreams while pursuing his own. About how they created a partnership built on equality and respect, raising a family and serving their community with dedication and compassion. The homestead itself became a symbol of what could be achieved through determination and love. Visitors walked through the gardens, seeing the same plants Lydia had grown, learning about their medicinal properties. They toured the cabin, imagining the life lived within those walls. They stood on the porch where James and Lydia had watched countless sunsets together, feeling the peace of the place they had created. And sometimes, people said, if you visited at just the right time of day, as the sun set over the mountains and the shadows grew long, you could almost see them. An elderly couple sitting together on the porch, hands clasped, watching the day end in comfortable silence. The kind of silence that comes only from a lifetime of love and understanding. The practical impact of their work continued too. The healing tradition Lydia had established, combining careful observation with traditional plant knowledge, had spread throughout the region. Several clinics now incorporated herbal remedies alongside conventional medicine. Following the model Daniel had pioneered after learning from both his mother and his medical school training. The family continued to thrive, each generation adding their own contributions while honoring the foundation James and Lydia had built. The values they had lived by, hard work, compassion, dedication to helping others, passed down through the family line. On the 100th anniversary of James and Lydia's wedding, the family held a large gathering at the homestead. Over 100 descendants attended, from babies to great-grandchildren now elderly themselves. They shared a meal at long tables set up in the clearing, just as James and Lydia had done for decades. Daniel, now 96 and the last surviving child, stood to speak. His voice was shaky but clear. "My parents taught me many things," he said. "How to identify healing plants, how to treat illness, how to serve others. But the most important lesson was simpler than that. They taught me that love is a choice you make every day. To see the other person, to value them, to work alongside them toward common goals. That is what made their marriage last 56 years. That is what made our family strong. That is the legacy we must carry forward. The gathering celebrated not just James and Lydia, but the life they had built and the family they had created. Their love story had been remarkable not because it was dramatic or unusual, but because it was real and lasting. They had found each other, chosen each other, and built a life together one day at a time. As the sun set that evening, the family members walked through the gardens together, older generations pointing out plants and sharing stories about James and Lydia. The youngest children ran through the pathways, their laughter echoing off the mountains just as the laughter of James and Lydia's own children had so many years ago. The cycle continued, life renewing itself, generation after generation. But the foundation remained. The land James and Lydia had worked, the cabin they had expanded, the gardens they had planted, the values they had lived by. All of it endured, a testament to what two people could create when they committed to each other and to something larger than themselves. That night, as the last visitors departed and the homestead grew quiet, the current caretaker, Lucy's great-grandson, stood on the porch and looked out over the property. He thought about the stories he had heard all his life, about the herbalist woman who lived alone in the hills, and the cowboy who climbed up daily seeking her remedies. He thought about how a gunshot wound and a desperate climb up a mountain trail had led to 56 years of marriage, 3 children, numerous grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and a legacy of healing that continued to this day. He thought about how love, real love, could transform not just 2 lives but generations. And he smiled, grateful for ancestors who had shown such courage and vision, who had loved each other so completely, who had built something that would outlast them by generations. Their story was his story, part of his blood and bone, shaping who he was and how he moved through the world. The stars came out, the same stars James and Lydia had watched together for so many years. The forest settled into its nighttime rhythms. And the homestead, built by love and maintained by love, stood solid and welcoming, ready for whatever the future might bring. This was the true ending of James and Lydia's story, not in death, but in life continuing. In children and grandchildren carrying forward their work and their values. In a place that remained a beacon of healing and hope for the community. In a love story that inspired others to seek the same depth of connection and purpose. They had started with so little. A wounded man and a lonely woman, meeting by chance in a cabin in the hills. They had ended with everything that mattered. A lifetime of love, a family that honored them, work that had made a difference. They had climbed toward each other and found not just healing but home, and that, truly, was everything.